I think it will thrill you. It may shock you. It might even horrify you. So if any of you feel that you do not care to subject your nerves to such a strain, now is your chance to, well, we've warned you.
Hey guys, and welcome to the latest edition of Real Horror Show. I'm Mark Sheridan, writer director of Cronewood, and today we've got a very, very special guest who is Sarah Cleary. Hiya, Sarah.
Hey, how are you?
Sarah, I was going to introduce you. Actually, first I should reference the fact that our co-hosts are actually missing in action today. Conor McMahon is apparently making a film, and Conor Dowling could be dead. We don't know, but we've heard he's probably fine. And Ali is stuck in work with some kind of a crazy emergency, so I hope it's okay, Ali. Sarah, how would you describe yourself?
Oh my God. Well, I suppose the easiest way to describe myself is to reference my work. And my PhD, which I completed a couple of years ago, and I'm now about to publish my first book on it, was the manner in which the horror genre has been controlled, regulated and restricted in response to its alleged effects on children. So if it's immoral or if it's censorial, I'm there.
And this is not just an Irish problem. I presume you're talking from a worldwide perspective?
No. So basically in the book, what I do is I take the UK, which very much parallels the Irish. I mean, there is changes, obviously, and differences, but I take the UK and I take the US response to horror since 1931. But I kind of pasted in by going all the way back to Matthew Lewis's The Monk, which was in 1798.
Wow.
Yeah. So, and I look at the way in which we have seen horror as this kind of very nefarious beast which creeps in through our kids' windows and corrupts them. And as long as we can kind of control this beast, we can control our children, we can control the things that they do.
It's really interesting to me on that kind of side of things. Obviously, both of us are very involved in the world of horror, and I kind of forget sometimes how so many people still have this sense of stigmatism or genuine, like they look at you different when you say that you love horror films.
Absolutely. But I mean, listen, this year we had the Momo Challenge.
Yes.
You know what I mean? And I followed
our listeners, in case they don't know what this is.
Yeah, so this was all over the tabloids recently. I think it kind of peaked in February of 2019. And basically there was this very, very strange story kind of originated from somewhere in Russia, somewhere, or Argentina maybe. We're not quite too sure.
Nice and exotic.
Absolutely. Where this image was kind of would infect children's mobile phone devices, infect their computer games, and basically play games with them and ultimately tell them to go kill themselves. And apparently it was reported in somewhere exotic that a couple of children had actually killed themselves. So this was this freakish response in the press across all platforms. Legitimate
press is really what was so crazy.
100%. It wasn't just the red tops. No. Where we had this, this is dangerous for your children. Do not let your children near this. And then we had all this kind of talking heads coming in and saying, well, this is what's going to happen if your children experience this. From day one, I called bull on it. And I just said, this is nonsense. And if you just even like a 5-second Google search on this, you will find out that it was absolutely rubbished. It was nonsense. It did not exist. It was a hoax.
What's really crazy to me about that is, firstly, how quickly it was adopted as a terrifying story. I saw images of what Momo supposedly looked like. Yeah. And the fact that they were pretty sure that people had been damaged by it, or telling every parent to run home and talk to their children and assure them, please don't kill yourself tonight.
Absolutely. And what happened here is that you had authoritarian figures telling parents to be afraid.
Yes.
And then what happens then is the children then look at the parents who are their authoritarian figures and they're getting freaked out. So I kind of think it's interesting. It's like, have you ever been on an airplane?
I've heard of them.
Yeah, one or twice, right? And a friend of mine was on an airplane about 6 months ago, and it was really, really, really turbulent. And the gas masks fell out. People were freaking, praying, everything. It was a proper Father Ted job, right? And they were looking at it, and my friend just kept her eyes fixed on the air hostess. And she said to herself, once she starts freaking out, I'm jumping.
That's exactly what I do.
Right? And the air hostess was annoyed, frustrated, but calm. Okay? And then she said to herself, we're going to be okay. We're going to be okay. And that's what kids do. They look at their parents and say, well, is that scary, Mom? No, okay, I'm going to get on with my life. But what's happening is that we have all these millions of child experts. It's one of the most lucrative fields of the 21st century is child parenting. And they're telling us to be afraid all the time.
You're damaging your children.
You're damaging your children by doing this. You're damaging your children by doing that. Listen, we got through the 80s. We're grand, allegedly. Okay? But and that wasn't as enforced then. But it's just ridiculous the way in which this is fear-mongering. Hence why the book that I'm actually publishing is called The Myth of Harm.
And so obviously I presume you're touching on it's not just the horror genre, like video games, anything else that's always been targeted, like rock music, metal music, you know.
Yeah, exactly. Like pop culture, but I specifically hone in on horror because I think horror has always been the low-hanging fruit.
I'm always amazed at how quickly people go back to it to blame things. Like for you, when you're studying stuff from a morality point of view, do you see connections between how people reacted to horror, say back in the days, Top Browning's Freaks and stuff like that coming out, calling all the controversy, to your kind of 70s, I Spit on Your Grave, to say Saw with kind of around the Iraq War type time? Are people reacting differently, or is it the exact same story peddled every time?
It's the exact same story peddled every time. History is cyclical. It's not linear. And we are just ingrained with this idea that history is linear, that we're getting more aggressive, that we're getting more violent, that our popular culture is getting more and more violent. It's not. You know, news break, it's not. We are getting less violent as a society. We are reading and publishing and watching more violence. There's a big difference about that.
So that's the clear delineation between watching and committing are two very different things.
Absolutely.
And would you say then, because for me, especially in movies, and we'll touch more on horror in a bit, but just even in general with movies, I think one of the strange things is because horror films at least portray the negative aspects of violence, while actually a lot of more modern, say, blockbusters are these safe, incredibly violent films where you can hit someone in the head with a hammer without any repercussions. Yes,
and they tell us that it's okay to do this, whereas in the horror film, there's always repercussions from it. You know, there's always repercussions. But I think specifically why I'm in love with horror, and I don't think I'd be alone in saying this, is that horror is simply the messenger. Horror is the mirror that we look in. But as in all things, we kill the messenger and not absorb the message. So that's simply what horror is doing. Horror is just telling us, guys, there's a really nasty side to life here, but we're going to explore it in a really safe space, which is the world of fiction and film. Hence why we flock to it, because we want to seek out, but we don't want to do it in an uncomfortable space.
But absolutely sure it's been done since Little Red Riding Hood and all those fairy tales we were told as a kid.
Absolutely. And I think one of the masters of that, I mean, there's many masters of it, but one of the masters of that is Stephen King.
Yes.
And Stephen King, what he's always done is he's always kind of peddled a capital HR with a lowercase HR. So if you take something like Salem's Lot, right? And it's like, we've got the capital HR with the vampires, and you know, I'm referencing the book here specifically, and we've got Hooby in the window and he's all molted and pussy and disgusting, and he opens his eyes and it's like, whoa, and the vampires are floating and it's all very scary, but we know vampires don't exist. Allegedly. We know vampires don't exist, so we're safe in this fantastical land. But the lowercase h that's taking place in Salem's Lot is much more horrific. So referencing specifically the case of the prom queen, the ex-prom queen who's now living in a trailer park, married to a horrible, alcoholic, abusive husband. Her life is in bits, is going nowhere, and one day she can't cope, she shakes the baby and the baby dies. She has a mental breakdown. She can't cope with this, props up the corpse of her baby in a high chair and starts feeding it chocolate pudding. And the chocolate pudding keeps falling out of the dead baby's mouth and onto its little belly. That, for me personally, is more horrifying than any vampire, any Jason, any Michael, any of these films, because we know that this is happening and it's horrific, and we know that this is taking place in Dublin.
Yeah, it's a funny one actually, because like I think for me, The Stand, well, it was probably when I was younger, was one of the first ones that hit me, and obviously again I was probably at the age who was about these kids in the Losers Club, so that really hit me. But like even The Stand, it was more not just the Captain Trips. Obviously, that's a terrifying idea of this infestation of a disease that's wiping people out. but it was more the dawning reality of the way people behaved was probably how people would behave. And that's actually so much more depressing and disappointing.
We're not good.
No.
We're not good. And I think that's why true crime has really just exploded. I mean, everything's cyclical. I mean, if you think back to like, you know, the 50s, we had the cycle of Westerns, and then it came back in the 70s. Saw it a little bit in the 90s again. We don't know when it's going to come back again. But horror also goes through cycles, and different horror goes through cycles. But right now, I think specifically what we're looking at is this kind of more insidious type of terror. You know, and people said to me, I think I was talking actually to Stephen about, you know, Trump horror.
Yeah.
And we were thinking about, well, what is Trump horror? I haven't seen Trump in any horror films. And it's not. It's this more kind of insidious feeling that is running through. It's paranoia. It's
Are we like
fear.
us, or where?
It's terror.
Yeah.
You know?
Give me some examples. What would...
Well, obviously, I think, you know, I think Get Out is probably the pinnacle of that right now. And I know that it's very much racially motivated, but I also think it's this idea going back to, you know, body snatchers. Whenever there's political turmoil, we start feeling very, very unsure and very unsure of ourselves. And what's more terrifying is yourself walking into a room.
Yeah.
And not recognizing yourself anymore. You know, that's more terrifying than anything else we can fathom.
So that's interesting because, like, obviously Jordan Peele is kind of seen as the big guy on the stage, I guess, at the moment. Did you think Us was better than Get Out? Do you think...
I loved Us as a standalone film. I think it was so unfair that it came out so soon after Get Out.
Yeah.
Because it's you have to put the two of them up beside each other.
Is it the difficult second album?
It is the difficult second album. And I think all the pieces were there.
Yeah.
But I just think it was a slightly little bit laboured.
I agree, actually. I deeply admire the fact that I think he was trying to go, he wanted to go bigger and he wanted to push it further. I think he ended up overstepping in certain points because of that, but I kind of would rather that he was trying than not. And actually, I don't know, have you seen Midsommar?
Yes, yeah.
I sort of felt the same thing. With Ari
all
Aster.
The components were there. I mean, listen, I am going to probably not be invited back here ever again for saying what I'm about to say. I said it at a conference a couple of weeks ago. I was asked to leave. I'm not a big fan of Stranger Things.
I'm okay with that.
Are you though,
yeah,
really?
I am. No,
are you sure?
I am.
Because I saw your face twitch there when I said that.
Well, because I've been so conditioned in this world where to say that I quite enjoy Stranger Things, but I couldn't care
you enjoy Stranger
whether it happens
That's
or
like
not.
saying it's nice.
But it is
That's
nice.
That's like saying it's nice.
But like it's perfectly good.
Oh God, it just keeps
sense
coming.
of like 80s nostalgia. See, I've a kind of an issue with the 80s nostalgia type thing. I think Stranger Things does it better than most of the ones out there. I just don't really know why.
Okay, so my take on Stranger Things is this.
And don't spoil season 3 of me yet. I'm only an episode
No,
in. I'm sure you are all the way through them.
Listen, when it comes to Stranger Things, I think all the components are there.
Yep.
But it's like walking into your parents' house and finding the box that they left of your neighbour's 80s toys. You don't have any sort of cool narrative to run through remembering those toys. It's all these 80s just toys jumbled into a box that look cool, act cool, but you've absolutely no link to any of them.
And see, I think that therein lies the rub. That's the problem where you're kind of going, I feel I should like this. And I think a lot of people have felt that they should love it and so have decided that they do.
Yeah. I don't think there's a heart to it. It's like, and I know you're saying, Sarah, how can you say that? You've got kids with bleeding noses and you've got children overcoming adversity and blah, 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 blah. But I think that soul that ran through take the Goonies.
Yes.
I mean, that's hallowed ground. Right?
It's hallowed ground for us, but is it hallowed ground to people who are a bit older or younger?
I think it's hallowed ground for everybody because, I mean, it's cult at this point.
Yes.
You know, and we kind of, one thing that the millennials have been very good at is a respecting cult. They have been very, very good at that. They wear the T-shirts. They mightn't have seen the film.
That's true. Actually,
okay?
That is true.
But what's so beautiful about that film is it's not trying to be anything other than it is.
Yes.
Whereas Stranger Things is killing itself with 80s nostalgia, which all the components are there. I just don't think it's got any heart or soul to it.
But see, and it's a funny one because in a way, I think when the Duffer Brothers made season 1, like Netflix just dumped it. I don't think they expected it to be anywhere near the hit it was. I think this nostalgia notion, and from a horror point of view, I'd even go into what's happened, say, even nearly over the last 20 years, but this whole throwback to the campy 80s horror film, but not actually a good one. Yeah. You know, your Hatchets or whatever else it is. Why do you think people want it?
I think when it comes to 80s horror, I mean, specific or especially for horror fans, I think it harks. We were kids in the 80s, late 70s, going up into the 90s. I mean, the big long childhood. It's like, when did we stop being kids? So it's like a big blanket. It's like going home on a Friday night and saying, Mom, there's no toilet roll. You know, even though you have your own mortgage. You know, I still do that. Like, Mom, there's no toilet roll. When is dinner? You know, and yeah, I have to do my own shopping. I have to pay my own mortgage, you know, blah, 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 all the real boring stuff. But when you go home, like, you know, you're smoking out the window. You're giving out to your mum to mind you. And I think that's what 80s, this hark back to 80s. We're all grown up now. None of us can afford anything. There's no job security the way there was. You know, in the 80s, everyone was poor.
Yes.
Now in 2019, some people are poor, some people are rich. There was this lovely democratic approach to kind of poverty in the 80s. And now it's like people who are staying in the arts are just broke.
Yes.
You know, and people who are in the arts typically veer towards horror. And we're just this big comfort blanket around us.
But yeah, so is it our way of trying to protect ourselves?
100%.
Yeah.
It's like a buffer.
And it was, that's an interesting one, because I remember reading a really interesting article. I can't remember who wrote it, arguing that perhaps it was the fact that they were someone suffering from high anxiety was the reason they were drawn to horror, because it was a way of trying to confront. And like, I think definitely for myself, that was a way of being very afraid of things and finding some way to brave it in a very safe environment and explore those ideas and, you know,
absolutely
think it through.
You know, and I think the interesting thing about horror is I think it's the people's approach to horror is very unique. And hence why I'm always kind of slightly fearful of when we say, well, horror is like a roller coaster. Horror is cathartic. Horror, blah, blah, horror, blah, blah. I think people's approach to horror is multifold. You know, some people's approach to horror is the same way people like rum and raisin over strawberry. Yeah. I just like a booth fright with my girlfriend on a Saturday night. Okay. And that's cool. That's legitimate too. Some people go into horror, say, for, you know, overcoming personal adversity. Some people use it as a comfort buffer. Some people are just intrigued by the socio-political commentary. But here's the thing. You can enjoy all of that at the same time. You know, I mean, I recently lost a big member of my family, my little dog, Kruger, aptly named. And Kruger was a huge part of our family. And she died on a Monday. And I literally went underground with a duvet and watched just the most awful series. Like, I watched all the houses. Like, all of them. Like, all of them.
That's a chore.
Yeah. And what's the cop one? It's so
Maniac
bad.
Cop?
No, which one?
Maniac Cop?
Maniac Cop. All of those, right? I just watched them all and they're garbage, right? And I adored them. And it really, it really helped me. You know, I'm not going to write an article about it because, like, you know, Maniac Cop and grief, it might be a stretch, but it really helped me overcome that.
It's a funny one, yeah. Especially for me, it's the franchises and those sequels seem to be that real comfort spot. Yes. I'm not quite sure why it is. Maybe because partly you're possibly less familiar with some of the later franchise entries than you are with the other ones. Because like Halloween is my big franchise, and I adore the first film. But again, when it's late on a Saturday night, I'm gonna throw on Halloween 4, maybe Halloween 6, just to fuck you people off.
Well, what about Halloween 3?
Well, you see, here's the thing.
Oh no, are you one of those people who don't like Halloween 3?
No, I'm one of the people. I'm one of the people who likes Halloween 3, but I have this weirdness about how it's retroactively become the cool one to like. Like nowadays, when you meet the people who are trying to show their props as a horror audience, they're kind of going, "Oh yeah, like I like the Halloween franchise, but of course Halloween 3 is the best." For me, that's like saying Friday the 13th, love it. Part 5, nailed it. You know,
see, Halloween 3 was always meant to be a standalone film.
It was
the end of that franchise,
and it's a genuinely good film actually. And I think that's why that's being rediscovered, because it was unfairly maligned just for the fact that it didn't have a tagline: "The night nobody came home." It's just such a weird thing to do.
Yeah, it's amazing.
But see, I think that does work, and if they'd continued that way, actually, I think it would have worked quite well. I still love Michael Myers. You can't do it. And we will get on to zombies Myers in a bit.
You always have to talk about zombies.
But it's, I don't know. It's kind of a funny one. Like when I think of what other franchises kind of jumped the boat like that, I guess Nightmare on Elm Street 2 very much changed the tone of it. Do you think that, like, do you think all franchises, do we need those ones that throw a major spanner into the works?
Okay, so I think horror fans are tremendously cliquey, right? And it's like, there's always this phrase that, like, I do hate this phrase, well, you're not a real horror fan unless you've seen. You've not a real, but I still find myself saying it. And I still, and it's kind of like, well, have you seen the third installment of the franchise?
It's not even that anymore. It's like, have you seen Halloween 6, the producer's cut?
The producer's cut, not the director's cut, the producer's cut, and all the little bits. I actually found the bits of film on the floor and stuck them together myself. This sort of thing goes on.
The TV edit of the original Halloween, it added depth. It added depth.
And I think an awful lot of that is one-upmanship. I think we love playing around with that sort of thing. Will we admit that they're absolutely atrocious? Probably not. But we do love kind of this one-upmanship in horror.
Yeah,
we're bad.
It's a strangely kind of competitive world that way. And for me, one thing I love about horror fans is when they kind of don't give two shits whether you love it or not. They're like, I just love it.
Oh, yeah.
Like when someone tells me they think Halloween 4 is a terrible film, I'm like, I think you're a terrible human being because I think it's great. And there's no need for other people to qualify. I think I get a bit more bothered when I think people are telling me their favorite horror films are 5 films they think I'd like to hear.
Yeah.
Which one, they don't have to be obscure, actually. Because if they're 5 obscure films, I'll also think you're lying to me.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Like when people say to me, well, you're into your zombies, Sarah, and it's like, what's your favorite zombie film? And I'm like, oh God, I hate that question.
Carnival of Souls, White Zombie, let's go back into the black and white.
Yeah, well, listen, without going back too far, probably my favorite zombie film of all times is Day of the Dead.
Of the 3, Day of the Dead?
Yeah, it is, because I think it's the most nihilistic of all the 3. The first one is, it's just a standalone in and of itself. It's a perfect film. Yeah. It's a piece of art. And then you've got Dawn, and everyone's in love with Dawn, and we can wax lyrical about Dawn until the end of time. But Day is just, we're doomed. It's done. What happens after the apocalypse? And it's just fascinating.
I actually agree, because I didn't realize for years after, because I'd loved all the Romero, the first 3 particularly, zombie films, and I didn't realize that there was such disregard for Day of the Dead until later, and I was quite shocked by that. Now that seems to again have come around. Again, I think it's just people at a certain age were just disappointed because they were expecting, I don't know what they were expecting.
The buffoonery. The buffoonery isn't there. That's, look, we got Goblin, and just that beautiful song is so cool. But in Day, we don't have that reprieve.
That's true.
There's nothing.
It starts dark.
It starts
that wonderful opening.
It ends dark.
There's no what's beautiful about Day of the Dead is there is no question during it about are they really going to solve it. It's just it kind of becomes that question of who is going to turn out the light.
Yeah.
And what do you do until?
What do you do when you're that person?
Do you keep struggling for it or
they're all insane. They're all having these weird dreams. You have PTSD running through it. You have, that beautiful scene with all the hands reaching out to grab her.
Yeah.
It's a marvelous. It's for me personally, it's the top one in the trio.
So
or quadro.
Well, see, does it go all the way up to Survival of the Dead?
Or Diary of the Dead, and we don't know.
The problem actually, because for me, when I saw Land of the Dead in the cinema, I was initially a little bit disappointed, but I've come around to quite liking what it is. And then Diary I struggle with, and then Survival I really struggle with.
I like Diary.
Really?
And it stands up to rewatch. Give it a rewatch. And I think it's what I like what it does is that it, especially say, for example, in the context of Love Island. Watch Diary of the Dead in the context of Love Island, right? Because what we have now is we've now hit peak saturation point in reality TV, right? The Kardashians.
We thought we'd reached it years ago, but apparently not.
No, it keeps on coming. So you watch something like Love Island and now they're all killing themselves. And there's a really dark theme now running through Fame, which we knew was always there. Right back to the Hollywood golden age was always there. But now we're seeing it in the tabloids. And it's horrific that people are actually putting themselves out there to their detriment. And that's essentially what Diary is doing. He dies in order to record what's going on.
Yes.
Okay, and I think that's what people are doing now with social media fame.
And I think that was around 2005 or so. Yeah. That was actually, that's that funny thing where things turn out to be a little bit more before their time than people thought. I know people have said the same thing about Scream 4 for Wes Craven, just even the idea of social media becoming whether the film is great or not, but the concept actually saw it coming.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the reasons why when I was asked, one of my favourite films was Pontypool.
Yes.
And Pontypool was really hitting those notes. And that was a decade ago, 2008.
God, it is 10 years.
I know, it's scary.
If you haven't seen Pontypool, can I just say, find it. It is, it was one of those films that just caught me off guard. it kind of creeped me and chilled me. Like the very base story of it, and you're better off not knowing too much going in, but it is just a radio disc jockey guy. He's in the station. I'm pretty sure the whole thing is in that station.
It's all said in that sound booth. And not unlike what we're in right now.
No, and there's just this wonderful notion of language being a way to actually potentially transfer evil or disease or something that's wrong. And even in our current climate, I think it's actually an incredibly
when you think of the
film.
Cesspool that now is Twitter, and the manner in which now we're struggling, liberals are struggling with this idea of freedom of expression. Me personally, always, if I'm allowed to say this, well then Jimmy over there is allowed to say that, and you struggle with that a lot. But what Pontypool does is that it's created in this kind of vacuum in which bouncing around the walls is meaningless words, but yet we're all driven towards these meaningless words, and we're all become infected by the meaninglessness of words, and that's what's happening.
No, there is, and there feels like, and it's been years since I've seen it, but there's this sort of inevitability of we can't kind of stop talking either. That even if we know it's doing the damage, that we still feel the need to feed the empty airwaves.
We're still drawn towards talking crap all the time, and we're still drawn towards looking at crap, and it's to fill the void.
It's interesting just when you talk about just even the struggles of, say, liberals online. Do you think horror is conservative or liberal?
I think horror is both.
Yeah.
And it's always been quite comfortable with the fact that it's both. So if you take something like probably one of the most conservative films that has ever been released, which would probably be in most horror fans' top 10, if not top 5, is The Exorcist.
Yeah.
The Exorcist is horrifically conservative. I mean, you take the mother is essentially punished for having a job. If she didn't, if she stayed at home, Reagan would not be playing off in a room somewhere where she didn't know what was going on. If she took better care of her, if she wasn't out all the time,
if she wasn't a single mum,
if she kept the husband, if she just kept that husband, he would have kept the show going. The boat would have kept sailing, and ultimately, it takes two men to come in and sort everything out.
Two holy men
to come in and sort everything out. It is one of the most conservative films, and I mean, it's even she's on the cusp of puberty, and she has been punished for her womanhood.
Yeah, it was fascinating because I'm a huge fan of The Exorcist, and I remember at the year I was at the Horror Expo when you brought that up, it was a wonderful revelation for me, because you were absolutely right, and it's a strange one because I still love The Exorcist all the same. It's not that like you can't, but you can't deny that oddness of it. I remember the same with, I presume you saw the documentary Horror Noir, where they're talking about the black history of horror films particularly, but Jordan Peele talking about Candyman. Yeah. And this very strange notion, because I'm a huge fan of Candyman. I think it's an amazing film, probably the best horror of the 90s. And there's this strange notion of he was a black, but he wasn't a slave actually, he was emancipated, but he was killed by white slave owners and brutally murdered by them, and he comes back and haunts poor black people and takes his revenge on them. Yeah. It never occurred to me that that's a very strange thing, but when he said it, I was like, holy shit,
there's
complex.
A very conservative strain to that. And I mean, what was a revelation for me a couple of years ago was John Carpenter was once accused of having a very conservative spin on his horror.
Was this the notion that people who have
if you have premarital
sex drugs,
you're going to take drugs, and if you drink, you're screwed, quite literally, right? And I remember him saying, and this is kind of going back to the point we were making before we went on air. He said, "I'm really sorry for ruining, all these generations of kids, but I just had them screwing and drinking and taking drugs because that's what kids did." And I think this goes back, personally to myself in my work, is that you have to kind of be a fan first, and you have to appreciate the world first. Sometimes you can tack too much stuff on
very much
to films. And as an academic, I struggle with that, because all we try to do is we take films and then we just take them apart. I mean, we're more brutal than any Michael Myers. We will take that viscera over our heads.
This 10 seconds where they walk down the corridor, that is definitely
that
a
is
commentary
everything
on the socioeconomic policies of Russia in the mid-1850s.
probably is. But at the same time, we have to tread so carefully with these films sometimes. Sometimes they are what they are.
Yeah, that's an interesting one because I was just rewatching Halloween the other day because I got it on Blu-ray, and I'm just always fascinated to see how good does it look now, because some of these films just look so much better than they were ever even meant to look. But I like, because this is one of my favorite films, definitely in my top 5. I wish more people could enjoy it as just what it is, as this beautifully constructed, straight up thing that, you know, and I actually don't mind people reading into things, because I think that's interesting, because we project ourselves into the situations, but the need to enforce it and say, well, if you don't enjoy it on that level, then you're not appreciating it.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why there's, you know, there's certain, sometimes I'll watch a film twice, and once I'll watch it with a pen in my hand, and the other time I'll watch it with my tongue hanging out. And I enjoy both watches. But I mean, if you take something like one of my all-time favourite horror films is Return of the Living Dead. Like, I adore that film. I'll watch that probably once a month, that film. And that is a real tongue hanging out film. But then I've also written on that, and it is probably one of the most nihilistic, you know, zombie films out there, because you can't kill the zombies, and they turn around, and it's probably,
there's no stopping them.
There's no stopping, and it's probably as salient now as it was in the 80s when it was first made, is that there's a line in it and said, but the film lied. But the movie lied. And I think that's probably as salient now, is that we're so engrossed in what the telly tells us, what CNN is telling us is breaking news, what Fox is telling us. Like, we have completely lost our media literacy.
Yeah, that's an interesting one, actually, because that's, say, for me, the challenge of a lot of horror filmmakers have nowadays is we are so savvy with so many of the particular kind of traditional legends, such as vampires, zombies, or anything like that. You get into this kind of weird area of how long do they spend establishing these rules, and actually, do we almost need, you know, the couple that's circumvent? I forget my word. Subversively move around. Something. Around those notions where, like, if it's a vampire, someone holds up some silver, and there's just a kind
You're
of
going to start talking about sparkles now, because I will leave the room.
I wasn't going to go there.
You are going there.
I will start defending the first Twilight if you want.
Oh my God, talk about censor. I think that's the only time I'd ever come down hard.
But, do you know, like, I can't remember, was it John Carpenter? Didn't he produce, was it not vampires? Was it Dracula 2002? Or was that or maybe it was Wes Craven. Someone was involved in some kind of way. But there was that notion of where a cross gets held up to a vampire and he laughs and says, sorry, mate, I'm an atheist. Yeah. I thought that was a good line. Yeah, that was a good line, because we have this arrogance of assumption of, well, we know those rules, like the zombies, shoot them in the head, but like Return of the Living Dead, what if that doesn't work?
The movie lied.
What do you do then?
What do we do then? And I think it's, you know, I love films like that turn things on its head. But I think, again, going back to the 80s nostalgia, I mean, horror fans, you know, we love, as much as alternative we love our rules and regulations.
Yes.
Hence probably why I've had more than one occasion stand up rows with people deciphering what's a zombie and what's not a zombie. Stand up rows. You know, is 28 Days Later a zombie film?
Does it bother you if he is or isn't a zombie?
You see, I call them a zombie film.
For me, they are in principle a zombie film.
They are
like,
in principle,
you know.
But strictly speaking, a zombie is a dead person, reanimation, come back to life. Oh my God, I'm nerding out.
But then, so we could do this for a while.
Oh, we could do this. Could
Stephen,
be a whole,
settle down there. This conversation is going to get deep.
Podcast.
If it's an infection where the person doesn't die and they're just infected, so therefore they're not. They have to have died and then come back.
Yeah.
Is the only way.
I still call them a zombie. And I think, you know, one of probably the biggest debates that exist within zombie lore is fast zombies versus slow zombies. So are you a fast or a slow man?
See, it's got to be slow.
Woo!
Why, Sarah? No, it's a funny one, actually, because I'm a huge fan of 28 Days Later, and that intensity that really brought new life into the genre, which I enjoyed.
Yeah.
But it's the creeping dread of, no matter how much you outwalk these creatures, that they're still, so even at night, in the dark, they're slowly shuffling towards you, and that eventually you're going to have to slow down and they'll catch up. That's what gets me. That's what gives me chills.
The relentlessness of it all.
It's the inevitability of it. That it's like, it's death. You can try and outrun it, but it will get you eventually. So, you know, you can tire yourself out. It doesn't really matter. It doesn't care. There's no emotions or feelings on the zombies point. They will just keep on coming.
And I'm a slow girl now as well, I have to admit, because I think probably again, 100% agreeing with what you just said. But the added dimension for me is just the absolute devastation of looking at somebody in the face who doesn't recognize you anymore.
Yes.
And people will unfortunately have to go through that if a parent gets Alzheimer's,
Absolutely.
or if a friend gets Alzheimer's, or if you've lost a friend to addiction, or severe depression, and that person just does not recognize or is acting in a way that you don't recognize anymore. That's horror.
You're right. And see, the lack of emotion and connection is what makes things scary, and particularly when it's someone you're close to. I think that is, and pretty much all the great zombie films have those moments of revelation, whether it's Johnny coming through the window in Night of the Living Dead, or all the way through all the Romero ones, particularly. It's, for me as well, with zombie films, it's the moments where, and I think Night of the Living Dead almost did it the best, it's this quiet stillness where we just observe them eating, but there's just, again, no connection. It's just, but even the guys outside, there's no angry ravaging.
No.
They're just slowly...
They're just mindless.
Yeah. And that's what Dawn of the Dead made it so chilling and stuff as well. It was this idea of, fuck, there's just nothing to them. And actually, that's a lot more upsetting than something that has conviction trying to hurt you. Because you can fight that.
Yeah.
That's an ideology or whatever like that.
Yeah. There's something kind of comforting almost about speed. There's agency there.
Yes.
And it's like, well, if we can destroy agency, then we can destroy the zombie. Whereas what do you do with just mindless, relentless onslaught of just this wave? What do you do with that?
It's funny because I'm trying to remember back. I don't know if Vincent Price's Last Man on Earth touched on it, but I know that I Am Legend's story had it. It's actually what bothered whatever the main character's name is in his house most was it was his next door neighbor at night calling his name out. And it's not just that the whole world is fucked. It's just this one person who is just calling your name over and over again. And there is the horror. There is that, I don't know, this violation, which seems so much more disturbing than, horrific violence.
It's that and it's gone out of my head now, the Arnold Schwarzenegger horror zombie.
Maggie.
I love that.
It's a good film.
I'm a big Arnie fan. I loved it.
Yeah, I thought he did a good job. I thought he tried.
I think he patronising son of a bitch. I loved that film because what that film really, really, first of all, Arnie can do no wrong, and second of all, it was just this. It's very much similar to a book by S.G. Brown, Breathers.
I haven't read that.
It came out at the exact same time as Isaac Marion's the Blood. What was it called? The romantic zombie film that came out a couple of years ago. Warm Bodies.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
So it came out at the exact same time, and one got blah and one got blah.
Yeah.
And in Breathers, basically the zombies come back, but they're second-class citizens, and people are afraid to know them. People are afraid to talk to them. So they become this kind of, subhuman subclass. And I think the Irish film The Cured, I think they did an amazing job with this idea of the second-class citizenship of zombies. And, purists may argue, but I love sentient zombies. I love them because, and Romero touched upon that from the start.
Yeah, he was working, he
did that from the start.
He was always working towards that.
This is nothing new, this idea of sentient zombies. So this idea that they can retain something but still want to eat you, they can retain a portion of who they were, but it's almost like drug addiction, or depression. They're still there, but there's nothing behind the eyes.
It's an interesting, because The Cure did touch on that, and I thought that was a really good place to try and take those things too. Was it Joe Dante's Masters of Horror episode Homecoming as well? That idea, if dead soldiers could come back, would they vote for the same president?
That's and that's a very underappreciated little short.
It is,
yeah.
It's just, again, whether it's fully successful as its own piece, maybe not, but the idea is a great thing where you've got to wonder.
Yes.
And that for me is the best place for particularly zombies. Actually, they work very well in a political kind of climate.
They do.
Just because I know the censorship and morality stuff is part of your oeuvre, is there a particular, what do you think are, let's say, the most shocking or violent films out there? And then following that up is there ever a cause for censorship?
Okay, so basically, I'll answer the first question first, I think. And everyone has their line in the sand, okay? And I think they have it as somebody, as a horror professional, you'll have probably a professional line in the sand, but then you'll have a line in the sand that probably jumps over that by a mile. But
Agreed.
It's still there in your personal life.
Yeah.
It's still there. professionally and personally are a little bit more intertwined with myself. And I think as far as I'm concerned, consent is my only line in the sand.
Okay.
I genuinely believe consent is my only line in the sand. Will I like the film? No. Will I watch it? If I know enough about it to not watch it, I probably won't. I'm not a big fan of the Human Centipede series of films.
Yeah.
Do I have any problems with it? No.
Yeah.
No, I'm just not a big fan, especially two.
I was going to say, actually, because like the first one is, it's kind of gross, but in that way that you're sort of looking to be, you know, and in fact, I expected it to go worse.
Yeah.
2's nasty.
2
and
is
that's
nasty.
different. It's not just gross, it's nasty.
It's nasty, and it's got also then that line in it where, you know, they see the film, so then they get and then that tramples all over my thesis then, where you can't be corrupted by watching a horror film. So I don't find it problematic. I just don't like it. But my line in the sand has always been consent. So I get very uncomfortable with talking about cannibal holocaust.
Okay.
Even though I spent a lot of time and I have an entire chapter dedicated to video nasties, I kind of gloss over. Well, I make reference to it, but I gloss over cannibal holocaust because of the turtle scene.
Yeah.
Animals can't give consent. Children can't give consent. So as far as I'm concerned, professionally speaking, that's my line in the sand. Everything else is allowed. I'm not going to like it.
Yeah.
I don't have to like it.
You
I
don't
can
have to
turn
watch
over.
it. Yeah.
I don't have to watch it. And that's my approach to censorship.
I agree with you on there's plenty of films I don't like. There's a couple I think are nasty in a way that if there was to be censorship, I could understand why. Or maybe I just struggle to understand why someone would enjoy it. Say, Human Centipede 2, I guess on some ways scenes in a Serbian movie, but even the original I Spit on Your Grave, you know, very, very rough, particularly in the first half. Again, the wonderful world of rape revenge, where it's like, but she gets her revenge, but it's like, but I went through 40 minutes of, you know.
So I'm an apologist. I'm very...
Oh, I like Spit on Your Grave, don't worry.
Yeah, I'm an apologizer, I have to say, for I Spit on Your Grave. I think all three of us, myself, Carol Clover and Mario Starr, I think, was one of the very first reviewers to come out and say, okay, guys, I like it. And then cover his head from the pelting of stones that he got. The reason why I like that film is because, first of all, it's etymology, or it's where it came from, essentially. And where that Mayor Zachary actually saved a rape victim.
I remember hearing that. Yeah, it's a very, actually, in fact, because a lot of people don't know this. So fill us in. So
basically, himself and his daughter were going down the street one day and a naked, bloodied woman came out of a bush. I mean, we talk about imagery, where he got it from. So this naked, bloody woman came out of a bush. He dropped the daughter home. And then in that split moment, he made a decision to bring her to the guards as opposed to bringing her to the hospital. Because he believed, and the argument is there 100%, that he wanted to bring her to the guards so that this guy would not go on and commit more acts, and that he would get reprimanded as quickly as possible, and then she could deal then with the physical cality of it then after the fact. When she got to the guard station, they wrote her off. They just said, you know, well, what were you doing? Were you wearing a short skirt? You know, the usual blah, blah, blah.
Things have changed.
No, they haven't. So we were wearing a short skirt, blah, 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 blah. And he realised there and then that rape justice doesn't exist. And it's 2019, and as a woman, I'm saying that. And that's a pretty dramatic, you know, burn my bra thing to say. And, you know, I'm not a man hater, none of this sort of stuff. But it doesn't. It's still very hard to prosecute.
It hasn't changed at all, and actually, people they pay lip service to these notions, but actually, it's ignorant to just say, well, because I said I don't agree with it, therefore the world is fine.
Absolutely. No. So what I absolutely love about I Spit on Your Grave is that the one tool that she's essentially quote unquote victimized for, which is her sexuality, you know, because we have all these long protracted scenes of her being, you know, legs and the short, well, she's not wearing a short skirt, but the legs are there.
Yes.
And obviously even the poster is undeniable, you know, her backside, right? Her sexuality is there. But and many more, I think, make the argument is that her sexuality is weaponized in I Spit on Your Grave.
She chooses to weaponize it back against the people.
She weaponizes her sexuality, and it's through her sexuality that she defeats the men. So instead of her sexuality being a negative thing, that, you know, oh, that short skirt, that knickers, that's going to get you, she goes, well, you know what? You don't mess with a woman's sexuality, because that's what's going to happen.
Do you know what was interesting to me on that, actually? Because, yeah, I have this strange relationship with I Spit in Your Grave as well. It was, I think the first time I saw it is the IFI, God knows how many years ago, did this wonderful censorship.
You know, it's still banned in Ireland on DVD.
Is it?
Yeah.
Because they showed, it was part of the, so it was censorship. So they showed the uncut versions of Todd Browning's Freaks, I Spit in Your Grave, and I can't remember what the third one was, but it was
Twilight.
No one's ready for that version. It was just really, really interesting because it hadn't lost any of its punch, which was, it must have been at least 30 years after it had been released the time I saw it. I go forward and back on the earlier part being the main focus on the rape, because as a filmmaker, I believe that anytime you deal with these kind of issues, you should actually honestly portray how awfully barbaric and horrific it is. I'm more uncomfortable with films that kind of gloss over it as in no big deal.
Yes.
And yet, obviously, it is fairly laboured in the film. But again, you know, these horror acts have such a huge impact on people. Maybe they should be. It's a tricky one, actually, because... You know, the liberal part of me thinks maybe it's good that there was this incredibly horrific scene in it, which sounds contradictory, but it isn't necessarily.
Yeah.
I do love the notion of her revenge. And it's weird because I've argued with some people on this where they think that it's unbelievable that after... So basically, for anyone who hasn't seen the film, I'd be surprised if you haven't, but it's... She's brutally raped by the men. I think they leave her for dead, don't they?
They do leave her for dead, and then they send back one of their posse who has obvious intellectual disabilities, and they send him back to finish the job.
Yes,
yeah,
that's what
and
it
he
is.
doesn't.
And so what she does then is she quite proudly turns up and intimates to the guys that she actually potentially enjoyed the act and would like to see it further, and the men fall for it. And I know some people are kind of going, there's no way a man would be that dumb, but honestly, because I've spoken to men who don't believe they've done bad things, but women have told me that they have.
Yeah.
They don't get it.
Yeah.
And actually, I think a lot of men would be ignorant enough to believe that maybe.
And I mean, look, it's set in a hyperbolic scenario.
Yeah.
It's completely hyperbolic. And, you know, thankfully, 90% to 99% of women, well, I don't know about the statistics, but most women hopefully won't go through something as hyperbolic as that. But most women will have encountered something uncomfortable that, you know, society would deem not necessarily, but why are you freaking out over that? And in most cases, there is no justice, you know? So that's, with I Spit on Your Grave, I think people need to revisit it within the 2019 context, because she gets her revenge.
She certainly does. And...
You know?
You know, I find it very affecting still, particularly the bathtub scene. There's just, it's quite a simple scene where she slices and blood sprays, but it, as a man, you feel.
I'm sure you do. You feel on many levels.
Yeah, and it's not as graphic as other films.
No, it's quite
have
artistic,
gone.
actually. Yeah, how she does it.
What's your thoughts on the remake of I Spit in Your Grave?
I like it. It's a bit slash and gash for me. I don't think, again, it had the kind of it's dare I say, it's too pretty.
Yeah, it's weird. It's polished. They the actors are able to some ways, but it feels like a movie. While
it does.
I think I Spit in Your Grave, and I would say chunks of Last House on the Left as well, to me, have this really unnerving, real feeling. You know,
Last House, and you know, you've mentioned Halloween earlier as well, and when I'm talking about horror, and in terms of, you know, the idea that there is a lowercase, I'm all about me capitalization, that there is a lowercase evil in existence, which is a lot more problematic than anyone can really cope with, is that there's two scenes that I always reference, and one of them is in Last House, and the other one is in the first Halloween.
Yeah.
In the first Halloween, it's when she's grappling with Michael, and the mask slightly comes off, and you're expecting this hideous Jason-esque, you know, creature from the lagoon to be pulled back, and you're kind of left with this kind of, he's not good looking, he's not bad looking, he's just a guy. Just a guy that you would literally walk past a million times on your way to get a bottle of milk. And that's more scary than it's just a guy. And the mask comes down again, you're, the monster
and
again.
The music kicks back in,
And the scene in Last House that I always find beautifully problematic is when they finished off that, or there's a very excessive, protracted rape scene
Cleaning
in
their
that.
hands.
And they're cleaning their hands.
Yeah.
And there's that moment of recognition where they're all looking around going, uh-oh.
They're washing the blood and kind of like this sort of
we
sticks
went
and stuff
too
from their
far.
fingers. And they have, because it's been in pure glee up to that point, and there's this really, and it's
long.
Yeah, it's long.
It's uncomfortably
I
long.
find it very affecting, that bit, because there's this slow dawn across the group without any of them communicating with each other. What they've done
goofed here,
and their faces just change, and there is a moment where humanity returns and they realize how appalling they are, and then it switches on and they carry
we're
off.
not comfortable with that as a society.
No.
We don't like to see humanity in the monster. And that's why I think, horror has always been blamed so much. And especially horror fans have been maligned as these kind of weird creatures that, he did that because he was into horror. He wore black. He's a monster. Well, we're really, really uncomfortable with the idea that bad people can do good things and good people can do very, very bad things.
Yes.
We're not able to kind of sort that out in our heads quite yet.
Yeah, people aren't okay with dealing with that. No. And do you know what I want to do?
We love monsters.
Yes. And I guess it's a tough thing, because in some ways people are sort of touching on it now, whether it's their reboot worlds or reimagining, where they kind of want to explain the monster, but that's different. What I want, and it's something I've worked on in a couple of scripts, but I've never actually put it to screen yet, is the notion of an evil spirit or creature can do good, but that doesn't mean at the end that it is now a good.
Yeah.
It is still equally as evil. It just, for that particular scenario, it was appropriate for them to,
Absolutely. And horror, I think, has always tried to push this idea that the monster isn't necessarily evil.
Yes.
That the monster, and I think that comes back all the way to
Frankenstein.
And the famous lake scene.
Yes.
Because
the flower, the girl.
The flower. And I actually have that image as a still over my bed in my house. Like, it's probably for me one of the most important scenes in horror history.
Explain the scene for people who haven't seen this.
So basically, this film was this one scene was actually only restored in the 60s, I think, 30 years after the fact it was restored. So basically, when Frankenstein, James Whale's Frankenstein was created, he made the film, and there's a scene in it where the monster, having been castigated by everybody, having been released to the world, is found a friend in little Maria. And little Maria is this 5, 6, cute as a button little thing.
Stumbles across,
and they're playing daisies, and they're making daisies, and they're playing with daisies, and they're making daisy boats.
And she's the first person, I think, to show him kindness.
Any sort of kindness.
Yeah.
So what they're doing is they're plucking the heads off the daisies and they're throwing them into the lake. And Frankenstein's monster, then seeing how much fun that this is, he picks up little Maria, not knowing the consequences of throwing a child into the lake will result in her drowning. And they came back when the scene was made, and they came back and said, no child is going to die on our screen. We can't have that. So what they did was they edited rather clunkily. And most censors aren't film critics.
Agreed.
Remember that, guys, because that's the big no here. What they did very clunkily was they took out that scene. So what you have is Frankenstein's monster look at her almost lecherously because it's out of context. And then it shoots to a scene where little Maria's limp, dead body is being held by her father with a lynch mob behind. And the connotation here is even more nefarious and insidious because she's got her stockings down.
They're down, yeah.
And that's always coded as sexual assault when we see the stockings down. So on a subconscious level, a sexual assault has taken place. On a conscious level, the monster is evil. And that idea continued on. Whereas if you go back to the stem of the word monster, the monster means to demonstrate.
Okay.
That's the stem of the so when you say when someone says you're very demonstrative.
Yeah.
So that's like blah, flaking around the place and showing hands and let me show you over here, and that's a demonstrative person. So that's the stem of that word. So the monster is there to demonstrate, not to be, but to demonstrate the evils around them.
It's funny as well, though, because like that accidental shall we say, the censorship creating this other kind of nefarious assumption about the monster is so true in so many ways for any kind of these notions of evil or not, where because we block out any sense of that humanity, we create an image of them actually being much more evil than they even were. You know, it's because that scene always haunts me. And De Palma's Carrie just sit in me on that emotional level of I go into the prom scene of Carrie understanding her and actually wanting her to.
But every time I watch it, I don't want her to do it.
No.
I'm like, no, she's not going to do it.
But it doesn't justify her behavior, but the reaction in me is fuck him.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that's what's interesting, because it challenges you on that, because I will admit that is not a good thing to murder everyone in the room, because a lot of those people did nothing to her. And yet the emotion, I completely understand. I think De Palma handles that just amazingly. Yeah. Particularly because in Carrie, just the lead up to that is the most beautiful, happy moments. And Sissy Spacek is so incredible. It's heartbreaking. Her eyes are just, she is having the best time of her life. And every time I watch it, I kind of go, this is great.
Yeah, you're rooting for her with her lovely homemade dress.
Little Tommy.
You're just rooting for her every time. But I think that's why we're so fascinated with true crime right now. You know, as I was going back earlier, as I said, these kind of cycles that we go through, and we're fascinated. Now, that's nothing new. We were crazy into our crime. I mean, that's going all the way back before horror had its day in the 1930s. It was all about crime films. Horror actually the word horror wasn't even used. They were called terror films. So we were crazy into our crime films. And then we had that again in the 1940s, and we had it again in the kind of the late 80s, early 90s with thrillers. Yeah. So we're going back into our kind of like our true crime phase now again. We're fascinated by it. And I think that's why people are fascinated by serial killers, because they are anomalies and they're safe. Ted Bundy is safe because he's an anomaly.
Yes.
Okay? The next door neighbour who kills his wife brutally is not safe. You know, we've had countless cases in Ireland where men have killed their families. That's not safe. Yeah. That's terrifying. Ted Bundy is safe because he's an anomaly.
It's easier to write him off as he was just...
Gacy is safe because he's an anomaly, you know? Whereas the dude down the street who takes a Fagari and shoots up a secondary school, he ain't safe.
Yeah, so and no easy answers for that kind of
No
work.
easy answers, yeah.
Right, before I let you go, there's two things I need to touch on.
Okay.
Firstly, because we haven't actually talked about any kind of new films,
we're
but
not
that's
sorry.
okay. I do want to just touch on your thoughts on Midsommar, because I'm curious, or Midsommar, depending how you want to say it. And then we're going to have a little chat about Rob Zombie, because
of course
we don't have everyone else in the room to give out to us, so we're just going to
go for it. Oh my God, are we just like Rob Zombie fans gone wild?
We're just going to say that 100% of the people in the room are going to defend Rob Zombie.
It's like spring break. We're just going to go wild, take our tops off, everything.
Well, I'm not going to say no, Stephen.
It is a Rob Zombie film.
Can we go? So, Midsommar, first of all, thoughts generally?
Again, I think we're veering towards Stranger Things a little bit with Midsommar. Absolutely gorgeous.
Yes. Stunning.
One of the most beautiful films.
Worth the cinema trip for the imagery. Yeah.
Alone. But I think it is problematic in the sense that, again, unlike the original Wicker Man, which had this beautiful...
But you can't talk about this without Wicker Man.
You can't. And I think that's the thing as well, is I think that there isn't enough context being given to Midsommar, because people are approaching Midsommar like, oh my God, this wild new... What is it? Folk horror. They've invented a new subgenre, and it's like, you know, you're one of Ireland's leading folk horrorists in terms of Cronewood. I mean, folk, but again, you didn't invent folk horror.
No, not in the slightest.
Folk horror has been around, you know, since Grimm.
But I think humanity's always struggled with its, you know, question of whether the old times were better or worse, and that desire to be nostalgic about it and assume that it's better or worse. Yeah. What I love, because The Wicker Man is one of my favourite films of all time, and you can obviously see that if you watch Cronewood, because it's very indebted to it.
What's that famous? Oh God, no! Yeah. Oh God, no! Edward Woodward. Oh God, no!
I'm pretty sure whichever cut you watch of Wicker Man, it's between 90 minutes and 100 minutes, and it does the full story, and I think it does its justice. Yeah. I think there's a lot of great stuff in Midsommar, like a lot of good stuff. 2.5 hours.
It's a bit of a bum burner.
I honestly think I could cut 50 minutes out of that and you wouldn't lose any of the impact of the film. In fact, I think it would be stronger.
It would be a stronger film. It's a big bum burner. And I am the most awkward person to sit behind as well in the cinema because I have a floating piece of coccyx in my backside. So after about an hour, I start squirming in the seats.
Non-stop,
non-stop. I have to sit at the back sometimes or else I'm just like, quiet down. So I found it to be a bit of a bum squirmer as well. And just the heart wasn't there for me.
For me with Midsommar, they're actually very similar to Hereditary in certain ways. There's bits where I wasn't sure whether it was trying to be horrific or absurdist, and I wasn't sure if he wanted me to be amused or horrified or maybe both at certain moments.
So a little bit kind of in the way in which Sallow deals with, is this horrific or is this lampoon or is this burlesque? You know, I felt a little bit like that. It felt very similar to yourself.
Sallow's a different level, though. Like that's another podcast to discuss.
But again, there is burlesque moments in that.
No, there is actually. Yeah, for me with Sallow, if anyone hasn't seen it, Pasolini.
Who died before it was released.
He did. He was murdered.
Murdered.
Yeah. It involves severe degradation of, I guess, lower class people by upper class people. It involves people eating poop off plates and stuff like that.
See, I think I got Sallow into my head because I think the poster for Midsommar is very evocative of Sallow.
That's true, actually. I'll give you that.
The scream there. I don't know, I got into my head. And I
think you're on, what's her name? Florence Pugh. I thought she was very good in Midsommar.
Yeah.
I think the first 10 minutes are spectacular.
Yeah.
There's a cry of grief within the first 10 minutes that I found devastatingly effective and real. And those are the really powerful moments. I love for once to see a relationship where two people clearly shouldn't be together and they're together for the wrong reasons. That's kind of nice because we're so used to the cute, happy things and they should be like actually... Yeah, potentially well-intentioned, but also...
It was, I wouldn't go so far as to say meh, but definitely lately I'm really, really slow to watch these big blockbuster films because it's kind of like that. I feel like those horror fans that go along to horror films didn't scare me.
Yes.
And while I loathe that expression, I don't think horror films should ever have to scare you.
They don't owe you nothing. Horror
films are not necessarily meant to horrify. But what I'm always afraid of is these big, gigantic films that I feel like are going to be life-changing and that, this is it. I can retire. I never need to see a horror film ever again. And I go to them and I'm like,
Yeah. I think because this is so beautiful, you actually were kind of going, I'm in a lot of this. And if you could have nailed it more, this could have been wonderful. I think maybe that's where the frustration comes from, this feeling of this could have been.
It could have been. So, you take something like A Field in England. Yes. Which is one of the creepiest folk horrors, ever
another one to check out, people, if you haven't actually.
And very underrated.
Yeah.
Very underrated. It's got this beautiful, eerie, uncanny, rotten, need to take a shower feeling throughout the whole thing that I got more from.
Yeah, and it's weird because I think in the shorter running time of The Wicker Man, they actually deal a lot more with, they're short pieces, but in The Wicker Man, you very clearly understand why people are acting a certain way. And even at the end, there is those moments of questioning, of realizing that if this doesn't work, where to from here? Like, where are we leading to?
Yeah.
Which Midsommar doesn't actually, even in its longer running time, ever get to touch on.
There's no justification. Like, you can actually justify the stuff that, well, if you're that way inclined, you can justify what's going on in Wicker Man, which within Midsommar, it's just gorgeous.
Yeah, it is. And you're kind of going, this is a much more beautiful version of that, but without all the impact.
Absolutely.
It's weird. I would still say it is worth a cinema trip. It is long, but it is one to see on the big screen.
Yeah.
It's beautifully designed. There's a gorgeous when they're dancing around the pole in one of the scenes, like it's just wonderfully filmed.
And it's it's this idea of daylight horror, which again is nothing new. But it is great to see daylight horror.
You don't see it as much anymore.
You don't see it as much. No, everything is boo horror, and this is very much daylight.
Yes, that's definitely something we've got stuck on. I liked Hereditary. I didn't love it as much as other people possibly did.
I loved Hereditary right up until the end. We had an email correspondence about this, and they just threw away the end. It was like you come for pints, Do you know what I mean? Honestly, it felt like that.
Well, I would say for me, if you were a fan of that in Hereditary, or if you weren't sure, the Irish film A Dark Song actually did a much better job at landing that ending or in that direction, because I think that's quite a powerful,
a much more ambiguous kind of
approach and it deals with grief and loss as well in the same way Hereditary did, but in a small way. So definitely worth checking out if you haven't seen it. And actually, on that point of Irish horror, Sarah, what, like, Ireland actually has a tradition of horror more than people actually realise when it comes to movies.
Yeah.
What ones stand out to you? What do you like?
Other than Cronewood.
Other than the wonderful Cronewood. Still not available in Ireland and England, but if you live in America, you can watch it.
I love The Cured. I absolutely loved it. It was a zombie film with intelligence, and it was a zombie film with heart. And I think that's very much capturing the type of horror in which I love, in which you can read on multiple levels, where you can get scared by the big monster coming to eat you, but also as well it's got this tremendous intelligence and heart to it.
Because I loved what The Cure was going for. I felt it suffered a little bit just from not having the budget to allow it. Just there's the few scenes when it felt like there should be a few more zombies that didn't have it. And I know that's because I don't blame the film. That's just you can't get the money for these things. I missed it a bit.
You see, as a big gigantic zombie fan, I'm never too worried by what I call fresh zombies. I mean, if you take something like that Canadian film The Battery, which was made for $6,000,
film.
One of the standout zombie films for me personally, and they got some pretty fresh zombies going on in that, you know what I mean? So that personally wouldn't be a denouncement on my part, you know?
Yeah, no, I get it. It's funny because I'm trying to even think back for, obviously, Francis Coppola came over here and made Dementia 13 a long time ago, but whether it's our own Conor McMahon's, Brain Eater moving on to Brain Dead, and
Zombie Bashers. Can I just say that, Conor, I know you're not here, but whenever I'm feeling a bit down, as a Wexford woman, I love putting on Zombie Bashers, and here it's everything. It's brilliant.
That did deserve its own spin-off movie, and actually we must talk to Conor someday about
I would
why
personally
that didn't.
crowdfund
There was
that.
a script, so
I will remortgage. I will do whatever it takes.
We must hear, because actually, but I'm even thinking, I really liked Isolation. Did you see that?
Absolutely,
it was a kind of a farm horror. Again, I can't remember. I'm presuming kind of early 2000s.
And there's not many farm horrors.
No, and it's kind of like Alien on a farm to some extent, but it was just done really well.
It was. And when you think about actually, a farm, it's an uncanny place.
Yes.
And especially rural Irish farms are very uncanny, because we have this whole kind of lore of the old bachelor. And I mean, what the hell is he getting up to with his sister? You know what I mean? And they're just kind of, we've always kind of been quite comfortable with the fact that there's incest and all sorts of things going on in Ireland. But we've never made that much horror about it.
No, it's funny. And I think that's when Irish horror is at its best, is when it's touching on, like, we're taking these genres that we know and love from across the world, but we're putting our spin on it. In the same way I think J-horror did, where they brought the ghost story. And of course they have these traditions of these things, but we saw their spin on it. Yeah. And it was so much more interesting than all the stuff we'd seen before. Obviously The Cure uses, the... like Northern Ireland, it deals with a lot of the themes of that. The Lodgers recently touched on.
And what a beautiful, again, shot in Wexford.
Beautiful looking film.
Beautiful film.
And again, did very well. Internationally. I'm pretty sure that's on Netflix now if you want to check it out. It was written by David Turpin. Film
that's
Ireland alumni. Alumni, is that the word we use?
Yeah.
But I actually had a chance to see the other day, thanks to Ali from our group, a special screening of Extraordinary. Have you heard of this film?
No.
So Extraordinary, I think, just won Best Film at Galway, the Galway Film Fleadh. And do you know what? I just had a wonderful time. So it's a comedy horror, and so comedy before horror on it, but it is directed by Micah Hearn and Enda Lockman. And do you know what's lovely about watching, kind of say, a comedy horror? Because it's not really trying to scare you, but it's made by people who love horror films.
So is it in the vein of Grabbers, or?
Do you know, it's...
Because I love Grabbers.
I would say, for people who love Father Ted, it's this kind of humour where it's Maeve Higgins is the main actress in it. She's a stand-up comedian, and she's very, very funny. They wrote it for her in mind, but it's just... It is about someone who... she used to kind of help track down ghosts with her dad back in the 80s. And so there's these old videotapes of the RTE TV show and when they were on nationwide. And then it's just something bad happened to her, and she's kind of pulled out of retirement to help a poor man called Martin to help with a problem his child has. But there's just something wonderful about that Irish sense of humour and bringing that kind of colloquial countryness,
the dumb believable
kind of it is, because like the beginning, like they start off with the notion about how hauntings are actually not as big as you've been led to believe. So they show, like, have you ever seen a haunted gravel and you see a single piece of gravel roll across the ground?
Oh my god!
Whenever
brilliant.
A green recycling bin, the lid blows up, that's a haunting. And so it's just this lovely idea of this smallness, and it's something that I think will actually travel very, very well. And apparently it's doing great at festivals.
Yeah.
But just that Irish sense of humour, even about
Yeah.
that's the kind of stuff we can giggle about.
Yes.
Without ever, we're not playing up to any kind of cheesiness against
Yeah.
us. I would definitely say that. I think A Dark Song, people could argue whether it's an Irish film or not because it's a Welsh director.
Yeah.
Really strong Irish horror film to watch.
Great horror.
I found that, like, it got to me. I felt the emotion for it. I'm trying to think, what else have we got?
Well, most recently I saw The Hole.
Oh,
Yeah.
The Hole in the Ground. I
The Hole in
haven't
the
seen
Ground.
that yet.
Loved it.
Yeah.
I loved its approach to
Did very well at Sundance.
very much so, and it very much kind of its major peaks then was obviously an exploration of depression and the manner in which, you know, this idea that there is a hole constantly there. And the ending for me personally, actually, because we were talking about earlier how so many horror films, they throw away their endings, and it's like, I call it this going for a pint mentality, whereas I think that almost the opposite with A Hole in the Ground. So much emphasis went into the ending of this film. It really, really, for me, just hit the nail on the head with that, because it doesn't necessarily summarize anything for us, and it doesn't make us necessarily feel okay with the world, which I think good horror always should leave us a little bit kind of looking over our shoulder as we leave the cinema.
I couldn't agree more. Is there anything you can think of from an Irish point of view that we have not explored, whether culturally that we should have, or
I loved that. What I thought was great was the famine block. But what was the
Black 47?
Black 47.
Yes.
I loved. It was like in our house we call any kind of like gun films, like, you know, John Wick or anything like that, we call them bang bang films. So anything where like people are going bang 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 bang. And I thought Black 47 was like a famine bang bang film. And I loved seeing the approach to the famine, which wasn't necessarily the whole Flann O'Brien Bale booked.
Yes.
Aren't you only eating spuds and we're all dying, you know, or I loved seeing it, you know, an agency there.
Isn't that the beauty of genre, that you can actually kind of talk about something without having to get to, it doesn't have to be under the hawthorn tree, you know, nothing against doing anything like that, but we don't need the Schindler's List of famine films.
Yes.
We can actually talk about it through.
Yeah,
you know,
I love, and there was
prism.
and it wasn't necessarily irreverent, because I know a couple of years ago there was issue with a joke made around famine or something. Do you remember that? And
yes,
we can laugh. There's a lot of things we can laugh at, but we're still not okay with the famine, I don't
Neil
think.
Jordan was trying for well over a decade to make his famine film, and he was told that people weren't interested.
The
in
appetite wasn't there,
which is crazy, because when Black 47 came out, everyone seemed to be delighted that there's finally something.
Yeah,
about it.
and I really, really loved that film. I think it should have done bigger and should have done a lot more with it.
Yeah.
I'd like to see more, I guess, thriller, but like, you know, psychological thriller, dark psychological thriller.
More De Palma-like films. Give me a bit of, you know...
Because we've got a lot of disturbing people running around Ireland right now.
Yeah, I want a bit of the melodrama, but also to talk about what's going on behind, like your Twin Peaks type thing. It's what's happening next door.
Yes, you know, and I think we're you know, considering we are a country of curtain twitchers, I would love to see more of that kind of what's happening next door, psychological horror. You know, something like that film, The Drugstore, where he does the photographs.
1 Hour Photo?
1 Hour Photo. I'd love to see more stuff like that.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay, then let's jump in our shortest version ever of Rob Zombie of filmography. Sarah?
Yes?
Rob Zombie's a good filmmaker.
Oh my God, amazing.
I'm unclear why this is such a controversial thing to say.
Because I think I'm a Rob Zombie fan.
Yes.
Right, first and foremost. And I've always been in White
From
Zombie.
White Zombie all the way through.
And if you like his music, then you obviously have seen his music videos.
Yes.
Which I adore his music videos. And some of his lesser well-received films, the merit in them, at the very least, is that they're like big, long music videos.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, people try to criticize them for that sometimes, and I'm kind of going, I'm kind of okay
but
with
I'm
that
okay
sometimes.
with that. So that's kind of like, you know, I'm okay with that. Now, does everything he does deserve an Oscar? No, not at all. But I am a huge advocate for Rob Zombie, because, again, what he is doing is kind of almost the opposite of what Stranger Things is doing, is that he is going back and actually using the 1970s actors. I mean, he's given a lot of work to some of, like, you know, these actors who were very much typecast as 70s horror actors.
Absolutely, that anyone bar an extreme horror fan would not recognize at all.
Well, a lot of Halloween's teenagers are in Rob Zombie's films, you know, and he goes back and he knows his stuff.
Yes.
He's researched it. He goes back and he brings soul into it and a passion into it. That films perhaps that, you know, you would say are technically better don't have that soul in them. So even the crap stuff is fun.
But see, then that's what's the interesting thing, because when Thousand Corpses was only shown in Ireland once, as far as I know, at the Horathon on the big screen. And no one really knew what to expect of it, because there was all this excitement, and it was like whether the Universal were going to release it or not. And there's this wonderful poster and the greatest tagline ever where life and death is meaningless and pain is hell. You're just like, and all I remember from that first viewing I had, and it divided the audience completely, was it was just a barrage of colour and energy.
It's
and
psychedelia.
Excitement. Yeah. And, you know, of course you can say, well, of course that's more Argento and this is that or this.
Yeah.
There's no doubt that he owes debts to these people, but then so does Tarantino with his stuff.
Yeah.
I just thought A Thousand Corpses was a blast, and I didn't know what was going to happen in it. And that was the first time at that stage in a while where I'd felt like someone was taking me on a journey where I wasn't in control.
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, it's a homage to Texas Chainsaw Massacre,
Yes.
you know, and it's a love letter to Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And then obviously he's hit the highest note with Rejects.
Yes.
I don't think he's hit that note quite yet since.
No.
But Rejects was his pinnacle, I think.
And that was the one people seem to be okay accepting. Even people who don't like Rob Zombie, they're kind of going, well, Devil's Rejects was pretty good.
And and that's why I think there's so much expectation now for the third installment.
Yeah, so I presume people are up on this. So 3 from Hell is a follow-up. If you've seen The Devil's Rejects, it's a bit of a head-scratcher because it seems like quite a conclusive ending. It involved the Firefly family racing in a car towards a police roadblock with, I don't know, maybe 100, 150 bullets fired at them, hitting them.
We saw them hitting
all
them.
to Lynyrd Skynyrd's Freebird, which is just an epic
But there is a
final
rule
scene.
in horror, if you don't see them dead, they're not dead.
Yes, and it's funny because
you don't see the body.
When I first saw that, I thought, well, fair fucking play. Like, that's it. That's an ending. To bring them back, I hope he can earn it, because for me, 31 was the low point, the real low point, and we'll talk about Lords of Salem in a moment because that is kind of a high point for
I
me.
liked it. I really liked Lords of Salem.
But it's dangerous. Even, of course, everyone's seen the trilogy completed.
Yeah.
But we've all seen Mother of Tears, the third part of Argento's trilogy, and fuck me, I would have been happier wanting more. You know?
Exactly. So listen, I mean, the thing as well about Rob Zombie's work is that I think it's a lot more intelligent than people give it credit for. And one of the areas in which I love about Rob Zombie's work is the humour.
Yes.
There is so much humour in Rob Zombie's work. So it's kind of like akin to something we were talking about before air, of this notion of Grand Guignol. And Grand Guignol was a form of theatre during the turn of the century, specifically in France. Though one of the last troupes that I'm aware of was operating out of San Francisco called the Trill Peddlers, and they had Grand Guignol right up until I think maybe even 5 or 6 years ago. But Grand Guignol is a specific form of theatre that mixes very comedic kind of sex romp, almost like Carry On films, with extreme horror, both psychological and physical. And one of the things that was a touch point in Grand Guignol was, and I'm not going to say it in French because people will just turn the podcast off. No way. It's basically translated as hot or cold shower. So you would have extreme horror, then you'd bring in a comedy high point, and then the horror coming in then would be all the more effective. It's like, you know, when you're at the spa, you jump in and out of the plunge pool and get back in. That's essentially what he does. And if you're into that form of humour, it's delicious. It really is. I mean, tutti fucking fruity.
That kind of annoyed me the first time, but it's great.
Oh my God, I love it.
What's funny to me is that, again, say the criticism of Zombie's work where it is that it's just he's a music video maker or anything. I really admire Lords of Salem, and I find myself going back to it more often than some of the other stuff. Not that it's the greatest film, and I would never kind of stand to people saying this is a masterpiece, you're all idiots. It's just, and I think it loses itself in the, again, the final movement and stuff.
Thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But one thing Rob Zombie has, which I would say a lot of acting filmmakers don't have nowadays, is he has a sense of imagery, of actual visual impact.
Yeah.
You know, there's a scene where Sherry Moon Zombie walks down the corridor into the room, and there's just this glowing red cross, and there's something behind her. And just with music and a quite simple visual imagery,
Yeah.
it impacts me. It grabs me. And I feel something. It reminds me even of what Lynch managed to do in some of his films. I don't know why, but I have a visceral reaction to that.
You know, the colours
Yes.
that he uses and the way in which he saturates his colours specifically to draw out different reds and blues. And
people underestimate actually the talent it takes to do that. This is not just a sake of just throw it at the screen. Like, 'cause we've all seen such terrible horror films where people do that. It's awful.
Absolutely. He is an intelligent horror maker. And I think people do not give him enough credit for that because all they see is Shri Moon Zombie and tits and gore and
they go for the low-hanging fruit.
They go for the low-hanging fruit. And he's actually a very intelligent and I'm very excited to see what comes out with him. And very funny. Like, you know, I mean, the cartoon stuff that he does is
I haven't seen El
just,
Super Beasto.
El Super Beasto is amazing. You know, it's got all the characters from Rejects in it and it's just, and there's also, what I love about Rob Zombie's work is the mythology.
Yes.
That it's really layered.
Yes, and he cares about that.
He cares about creating a mythology that perhaps, you know, if you look at some of the newer films that have come out, like The Nun or Annabelle, or I know, any of these type of films, they're just so vacuous.
Yes,
and it's created within a vacuum of nothingness.
Like, I'm quite a supporter in general of Blumhouse. I think they brought a lot of good stuff to horror, but when I see stuff like The Nun or the Annabelle sequels or even Annabelle itself, it bothers me how there's all this stuff in there that I should be at least enjoying on some base level, and it's just incredibly, like, I can barely make my way through the film. Yeah, and I'd nearly watch anything.
Yeah, I actually had to turn off the last Annabelle.
Yeah,
and I don't do that.
Before then, okay, because I will have to wrap it up because Stephen's about to throw a shoe at me.
Okay.
Rob Zombie, do you think the best thing that could happen to him is that he directs someone else's script?
No, I don't think he's able to do that.
He's the auteur who just has to...
He is the auteur, and because, again, it's going back to this mythology that is, you know, it's almost like, I would almost liken the way in which Rob Zombie writes to Irvine Welsh. You know, you look at Irvine Welsh books and you'd be reading a book that has nothing to do with Renton or Sick Boy or any of the characters, and they'll just pop in, they'll kind of walk in on the page and walk back out again. And when, you know, I'm an avid Irvine Welsh fan, so when you read his books, it might be a mention, it might be a chapter, it might be a paragraph, but there's always some sort of mention to the mythology and the universe in which he has created, and Rob Zombie does that beautifully as well. I don't think he could direct someone. We saw what happened with Halloween.
We did. That's true. Okay, well then, just and as a final note, what has you excited for horror? What would you like to see more of in the horror world?
Oh my God, that's the most horrible question ever. More zombies, more. No, I'm only messing. I'm loving seeing this really interesting raft of kind of intelligent horror films that aren't necessarily masquerading as intelligent horror films. I think we need to go back to an era in which a horror film could be enjoyed by multiple people on multiple levels and be able then to take from it what we want. And we saw that specifically in the 70s and 80s. And I think we need to go back to that because a lot of the big blockbusters at the moment are just, they're nothing, you know. I want to see a time in which people are queuing up to go see The Exorcist again, you know.
I couldn't say it better myself. Sarah, thank you so much for coming in today.
Thank you so much. Thank you. More zombies.